I'm Greg, 68M, a retired plumber who's been feeling pretty low these days. My wife, Helen, passed away 5 years ago from cancer, and since then, life's been a lonely road. We were married for 40 years, and adjusting to life without her has been harder than I ever imagined. We met when we were just teenagers. I was apprenticing as a plumber, and she worked at the local diner. It was love at first sight, and we built our life together from the ground up. I've got one son, Mark, 42M, who's married to Victoria, 39F. They have a beautiful little girl, Kiara, 5F, who's the light of my life. Mark followed in my footsteps for a while, working with me in my plumbing business after high school. But he always had bigger dreams. With Helen's and my encouragement, he went to college and became an accountant. I was so proud of him, even though I missed having him work alongside me. I've always had a rocky relationship with Victoria. She comes from a well-to-do family. Her dad, Richard, is a big-shot lawyer in the city, and her mom, Patricia, comes from old money. From the day Mark introduced us, I could tell Victoria looked down on me. She'd make these little comments about my job, asking if I ever considered moving up in my career. It stung, but I tried to brush it off for Mark's sake. I remember the day Mark told me he was going to propose to Victoria. He was nervous, not just about asking her, but about telling me. He knew things were tense between Victoria and me. I told him that if she made him happy, that's all that mattered. But privately, I worried about how their different backgrounds would affect their marriage. Their wedding was a lavish affair, nothing like the simple ceremony Helen and I had. Victoria's parents spared no expense, and I felt out of place in my rented tux. During the reception, I overheard Victoria's mother telling a friend how relieved she was that her daughter had married up and wouldn't have to worry about money. It took everything in me not to say something. Things got worse when Kiara was born. I was over the moon to be a grandfather, but Victoria always seemed reluctant to let me spend time with her. She'd make excuses about why I couldn't babysit or why they couldn't visit. Mark would try to smooth things over, but I could tell he was caught in the middle. I remember one incident when Kiara was about 2. I had come over to babysit while Mark and Victoria went to a work event. When they got home, Victoria freaked out because I had let Kiara play with some of my old, clean plumbing tools. She snatched Kiara away, saying she didn't want her getting ideas about following in my footsteps. Mark tried to calm her down, saying it was just harmless play, but the damage was done. Despite Victoria's efforts, Kiara and I have managed to build a close relationship. We have our little traditions, like making pancakes together on Saturday mornings when she stays over. I teach her little things about tools and how things work, and her eyes light up with curiosity. It reminds me so much of Mark at that age. Last week, I found out Kiara's 6th birthday party is coming up. I didn't hear about it from Mark or Victoria. My neighbor, Bob, mentioned it because his granddaughter got an invitation. I was hurt and confused. How could they not invite me to my own granddaughter's birthday? I spent a few days mulling it over, wondering if there had been some mistake. Maybe the invitation got lost in the mail? But deep down, I knew better. This was just the latest in a long line of slights from Victoria. Finally, I worked up the courage to call Mark and ask about the party. He hemmed and hawed, making excuses about how it was just a small gathering. But I could hear the guilt in his voice. I pressed him, reminding him that Bob's granddaughter had been invited, so it couldn't be that small. After a long pause, Mark finally admitted the truth. Victoria didn't want me there because she was embarrassed by me. She told Mark that having a blue-collar grandfather at the party would make her look bad in front of her fancy friends. She was worried I'd show up in my work clothes or talk about plumbing, and it would ruin the sophisticated image she was trying to project. I was stunned into silence. All these years, I'd tried to be understanding of Victoria's attitude, but this was a step too far. This wasn't just about me anymore, it was about Kiara. What kind of message were they sending her by excluding her grandfather from her birthday? I told Mark I was disappointed in him for going along with this. He tried to apologize, saying he'd make it up to me, but I wasn't having it. I reminded him of all the times I'd supported him, even when it meant sacrificing my own dreams. I had wanted him to take over the family business, but when he said he wanted to go to college, Helen and I worked extra hours to help pay for it. And this is how he repaid me? The next day, I decided I couldn't let this go. I drove over to their house, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. As I pulled up, I saw Victoria in the front yard, chatting with some neighbors. When she saw me, her face fell. I could see the panic in her eyes as I walked up the driveway. I walked right up to her and calmly said, "I know about the party, and I know why I'm not invited. I want you to know that I'm done trying to win your approval. From now on, if you want to see Kiara, you'll have to bring her to me." Victoria's face turned red, and she started to sputter, but I just turned and walked away. As I was leaving, I saw Mark pull into the driveway. He looked panicked when he saw me, but I just gave him a nod and drove off. Now, I'm sitting at home, surrounded by photos of Helen, wondering if I did the right thing. Part of me feels guilty for potentially causing problems for Mark and Kiara. But another part of me feels like it was long overdue. I've spent years trying to be the bigger person, but at what cost? My own self-respect? I don't know what's going to happen next. Will Mark finally stand up to Victoria? Will I still get to see Kiara? I'm worried, but I'm also tired of being treated like I'm less than just because of my job. I worked hard all my life to provide for my family. I put food on the table, kept a roof over our heads, and even managed to save enough to help Mark through college. Doesn't that count for something? I keep thinking about what Helen would say if she were here. She always knew how to handle difficult situations with grace. But she also taught me the importance of standing up for myself. I just hope I haven't made things worse for everyone involved. Update 1. It's been a week since the confrontation with Victoria, and things have taken an unexpected turn. The day after I confronted her, Mark showed up at my door. He looked awful, like he hadn't slept in days. His eyes were red-rimmed, and his clothes were wrinkled. It reminded me of how he looked during his final exams in college. He asked if he could come in, and of course, I let him. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where we used to eat dinner as a family when he was growing up. For a while, we just sat in silence. I could tell he had a lot on his mind, but I waited for him to speak first. Finally, Mark told me that after I left, he and Victoria had a huge fight. He said he finally stood up to her about how she treats me and that he was ashamed of himself for letting it go on for so long. He admitted that he'd been afraid of rocking the boat, worried that if he pushed back too hard, Victoria might leave him. As we talked, Mark revealed something that shocked me. Victoria's dad, Richard, the big shot lawyer, had actually been disbarred a few years ago for some shady dealings. Apparently, he had been manipulating client funds and got caught. The family had kept it quiet, and Victoria had been overcompensating ever since, trying to maintain their image of success. It didn't excuse her behavior, but it explained a lot. I remembered how Victoria's attitude had seemed to shift about 3 years ago, becoming even more focused on appearances and status. At the time, I had chalked it up to her joining some fancy country club, but now it all made sense. Mark went on to tell me that he decided to move out for a while. He said he needed time to think about his marriage and what kind of example they were setting for Kiara. He looked at me with tears in his eyes and asked if he could stay with me for a bit. Of course, I said yes. How could I turn away my own son? We spent the rest of the day moving some of Mark's things into the spare room, Helen's old sewing room that I had never had the heart to change. As we worked, we talked more than we had in years. Mark told me how he'd always admired my work ethic, even when Victoria made him feel ashamed of my profession. He apologized for not standing up for me sooner, and I could see the genuine remorse in his eyes. The next day, Victoria showed up at my house. She was a mess, mascara running down her face, hair disheveled. She started screaming as soon as I opened the door, accusing me of turning Mark against her and ruining their family. I stayed calm, remembering how Helen always said that yelling back never solved anything. I told Victoria that her own actions had led to this. I reminded her of all the times she had made me feel unwelcome, all the snide comments about my profession, and how she had tried to keep Kiara away from me. I told her that a family built on lies and pretense was no family at all. Mark came out when he heard the commotion. He asked Victoria to leave, which only made her more upset. She turned to him, begging him to come home, promising things would be different. But Mark stood his ground. He told her he needed this time to figure things out, and that if she really wanted to save their marriage, she needed to take a hard look at her own behavior. As Victoria drove away, I saw the toll this was taking on Mark. He looked both relieved and devastated. I put my hand on his shoulder, telling him he'd done the right thing. We spent that evening looking through old photo albums, remembering happier times. The next few days were tense. Mark was clearly struggling with his decision, but he also seemed relieved to be away from the constant pressure of maintaining appearances. We spent a lot of time talking about his childhood, my relationship with Helen, and what he wanted for Kiara's future. Kiara's birthday party came and went. Mark took her out for a special daddy-daughter day instead of the big party Victoria had planned. When he brought her over to my house afterward, Kiara was beaming. She told me all about their day and how she got to pick out her own cake at the local bakery, the same one where Helen and I used to get our anniversary cakes. It wasn't the fancy party Victoria had envisioned, but Kiara seemed happier than I'd seen her in a long time. She showed me the little toolkit Mark had bought her, proudly demonstrating how she could use the plastic screwdriver. It brought tears to my eyes, reminding me of when Mark was that age, always wanting to help me with my work. As for me, I'm still processing everything. I'm sad that it came to this, but I'm also hopeful that maybe this will be a wake-up call for Victoria. And if not, at least Mark is finally standing up for what's right. I just hope that whatever happens, Kiara doesn't get caught in the middle. I find myself talking to Helen's picture a lot these days, wondering what she would make of all this. I can almost hear her voice, telling me to have faith in our son and to keep being there for Kiara. It's not going to be an easy road ahead, but I'm ready to face whatever comes next. Update 2. It's been a month since Mark moved in with me, and things have been interesting, to say the least. The house feels alive again, reminding me of when Mark was younger and the rooms were filled with the sound of his laughter and the clatter of his toys. But there's also a heaviness in the air, the weight of unresolved conflicts and uncertain futures. Victoria has been on a campaign to win Mark back. She's shown up at my house several times, alternating between tearful apologies and angry accusations. Each time, Mark has stood his ground, telling her that they need this time apart to figure things out. I've tried to stay out of it, but it's hard when it's happening on my front porch. One day, Victoria arrived with a peace offering, a homemade lasagna, Mark's favorite. I remembered Helen teaching her the recipe years ago, before things got so complicated. For a moment, I saw a glimmer of the girl Mark had fallen in love with. But then she started in on how she was the wrong party in all this, and the moment was gone. The biggest development came last week when Victoria's parents showed up. Patricia, her mother, was clearly embarrassed by the whole situation. She stood back, wringing her hands and looking like she wanted to be anywhere else. But Richard, Victoria's father, was another story entirely. Richard started yelling as soon as he got out of the car. He called Mark ungrateful, accusing him of abandoning his family. He ranted about how he had given them everything, a big house, expensive cars, lavish vacations, and this was how Mark repaid him. That's when I stepped in. I told Richard that if he wanted to talk about abandonment, we should discuss how he abandoned his ethics and got disbarred. The look on his face was priceless. He turned to Victoria, demanding to know how I knew about that. It turns out, Victoria had never told her parents that Mark knew about the disbarment. Things got heated after that. Richard tried to justify his actions, saying he had only been trying to provide for his family. I countered that there was no justification for stealing from clients. I told him that true provision wasn't about fancy cars or big houses, but about teaching your children integrity and the value of honest work. As voices raised and tempers flared, I found myself thinking about all the times I had bit my tongue over the years for the sake of peace. But not this time. I was done being looked down upon by people who thought they were better than me just because they wore suits to work instead of overalls. Eventually, I asked them all to leave. As they were going, Patricia hung back. She apologized to me, saying she had no idea things had gotten so bad. She admitted that they had spoiled Victoria and that maybe this was the wake-up call their daughter needed. There was a sadness in her eyes that made me wonder if she had her own regrets about the way they had raised Victoria. After they left, Mark thanked me for standing up for him. We had a long talk about family, values, and what really matters in life. He told me he was proud to be my son and that he wanted Kiara to grow up knowing the value of hard work and integrity. It reminded me of conversations I used to have with my own father, a carpenter who taught me the importance of taking pride in your work, no matter what that work was. The next day, Mark called Victoria and told her he wanted to start couples counseling. He made it clear that if they were going to make their marriage work, things would have to change. Victoria agreed, sounding more humble than I'd ever heard her. As for Kiara, she's been spending more time with us. She even asked me to teach her how to use some of my old plumbing tools. I started her off small, showing her how to use a wrench to tighten a bolt. Watching her face light up as she learned something new reminded me of Mark at that age. It gave me hope that no matter what happens between Mark and Victoria, Kiara will grow up knowing she's loved and valued for who she is, not what she has. I don't know what the future holds for my family. There's still a lot of hurt and mistrust to work through. But for the first time in a long while, I feel like we're on the right path. And whatever happens, I'll be here, ready to lend a helping hand or a listening ear, just like I've always done. Update 3, it's been 6 months since this all started, and I've got some final updates to share. Mark and Victoria have been in counseling, and while things aren't perfect, they're making progress. Mark moved back home last month, but he makes sure to bring Kiara over to visit me regularly. The house feels emptier without Mark here, but I'm glad he's trying to work things out with Victoria. I miss having him around, our late night talks over beers, watching old movies together like we used to when he was a kid. But I know he needs to focus on his family now. Kiara's visits are the highlight of my week. She's always full of stories about school and her friends. Last week, she proudly showed me a project she did for class, a poster about different jobs. She had drawn a picture of me in my plumber's uniform, standing next to a picture of her dad in a suit. It warmed my heart to see that she values both of our professions equally. The biggest surprise came from Victoria herself. She showed up at my door one day, alone, and asked if we could talk. I was hesitant at first, but I invited her in. We sat at the kitchen table, the same place where we'd had so many tense conversations over the years. Victoria apologized for her behavior over the years, admitting that her own insecurities had caused her to lash out at me. She told me about growing up with the pressure to be perfect and how her father's disbarment had shattered her worldview. For the first time, I saw her as a person, not just my difficult daughter-in-law. We had a long, honest conversation. I shared stories about my own struggles when I was starting out as a plumber, and how I'd learned to take pride in my work regardless of what others thought. I told her about the satisfaction of solving problems and helping people, even if it meant getting my hands dirty. Victoria listened, really listened, for what felt like the first time. At the end of our talk, Victoria asked if I would be willing to teach her some basic plumbing skills. She said she wanted to be able to fix things around the house and set a better example for Kiara. I was skeptical at first, but I agreed. To my surprise, Victoria has been coming over once a week for plumbing lessons. She's not a natural, but she's persistent. Last week, she successfully fixed a leaky faucet all on her own. The look of pride on her face reminded me of Mark when he was young and first learning the trade. Kiara is loving all of this. She joins in on our lessons sometimes, and it's become a sort of family bonding time. She told me the other day that she wants to be a plumber lawyer when she grows up, which made us all laugh. It's nice to see her understanding that all jobs have value. Things aren't perfect. Victoria still has moments where her old attitudes shine through, and Mark is still working on standing up for himself more. But we're all trying, and that's what matters. I've seen a real change in how Victoria treats me, and more importantly, in how she talks about different types of work around Kiara. As for me, I feel like I've got my family back. More than that, I feel respected in a way I haven't in years. It's been a long, hard road, but standing up for myself that day was the best decision I could have made. It forced us all to confront some hard truths and come out stronger on the other side. I still miss Helen every day. I wish she could see how things have turned out. But I like to think she'd be proud of how we've all grown. I don't know what the future holds, but I do know one thing. The next time there's a birthday party, I'll be there, proudly wearing my plumber's cap if Kiara asks me to. And who knows, maybe Victoria will be right there with me, showing off her new skills to her fancy friends. Life has a funny way of surprising you sometimes.